going. All right. We are recording in progress. That's what they are saying. Okay. Now I want to just change my exit full screen so that I can see that you are joining me. And I can see that you are joining me. Already we have 25 people right here. So thank you so much for being with me tonight. As all of you who've been with me before know, I want to find out who is here on Zoom with me for the first time. And if you go down to the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, on some devices, it might be on the side, click on that and you can type in there if you are here for the first time with me, and I would love to know. Now, of course, I value all of my regular people as well. And yay, we are here together. So let's first talk about a couple of things. First of all, this is being recorded. It is being streamed on Facebook Live. Hi, Facebook people. And so you have the option in the future of either viewing this again or sharing that recording with other people, okay? And Jen, welcome. Maria, welcome. I am so glad you're here for the first time. What all of the first timers need to know is, number one, at the end of my presentation, that's when I take questions in chat and I take them in the order that they are written. So if as they occur to you during the course of the program, I will take those questions, all right? So Catherine, you're already first in line for a question. And it could be that some of these questions are going to be answered in my presentation. But in any case, I am so glad you're with me. I also often start off these happy hours by asking you what's in your glass. Now I'll tell you what's in my glass. A hydrangea martini. And what is a hydrangea martini? A martini made with Empress gin, which is blue because it is colored with sweet pea flowers. Unfortunately, I can't drink this now because I don't drink in Zoom. So I have a glass of water for when I'm thirsty, all right? As I often say to all of you, it doesn't matter what's in your glass. What matters is that we are here together, having fun with plants, and tonight it's all about hydrangea happiness. So glad to, be here with you, whether you are sipping tea, whether you are sipping coffee, whiskey, wine, sparkling water. What matters is let's have a happy hour together. And tonight, it's all about hydrangeas. Now I'm going to go right into my presentation, and that's because we have a lot to cover tonight. We do have a lot to cover, and I want to be sure to get to your questions as well. Let me just quickly mention, I am wearing my hydrangea scarf. Isn't this amazing? It is from Voila, from artist Frederic. Frederic has a shop in Yarmouth Port on 6A, 169 Main Street. I'm reading off of her card. 169 Main Street on 6A in Yarmouth Port. She has hydrangea everything there. So if you are as hydrangea obsessed as I am, check out Frederic's work. She's amazing. Okay, now let us get to sharing the screen. And if you are joining me, by the way, on Facebook Live, know that if you type questions in comments there, I will answer them either later this evening or tomorrow. Okay, I promise I will. It's just that I can't do both at the same time because I wish I could clone myself, but there we are. Okay, so let's share this. Let's play the slideshow. And here we are in Hydrangea Happy Hour at Hyannis Country Garden. And for those of you happy hour fans, we will be adding more of these. I think we will probably do monthly from September through the winter. So Stay tuned, look for our events page for all of that. You know, at Hyannis Country Garden, we like to talk about us being your hydrangea headquarters. In fact, I have thought that maybe for these 10 days in July during the Cape Cod Hydrangea Festival, we should change our name from Hyannis Country Garden to Hydrangea Country Garden. What do you think? Yeah, type in chat if you agree with me. Hydrangea Country Garden, that's what it is for the next 10 days because the Hydrangea Festival opened today. And by the way, if you haven't downloaded the list of open gardens and looked at the descriptions and decided where you're going to go, please go to capecodhydrangeafest.com and you will find all the information there. And I hope I see many of you in my gardens. My gardens are open on Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday of this coming week. So come on, it's for the benefit of 3 different nonprofits. Okay, now I need you to know, and I'm going to repeat this at the end for those of you who are just recently joining. Saturday at 4 o'clock, my friend and wonderful shrub expert and such an amazing person, Natalie Carmoli. She is here from Proven Winners Spring Meadow Nursery. Spring Meadow, by the way, grows the shrubs that are in the Proven Winner line. So she is going to be in our store Saturday at 4 o'clock. Come and hear her. She's got all kinds of Proven Winners swag and plants to give away. So it's going to be good. I will also mention to those of you who are new to this, I don't mind if you take a picture of any of the screens with your phone or take a screenshot. You may want to remember some of this information, and there are several ways you can do that. First of all, you can take that screenshot. You can take this phone, picture. Number 2, this is being recorded both for Country Garden and on Facebook Live Country Garden page. So you can go back and review the recording and look for the recording on the events page at hyanniscountrygarden.com in the future. Now, Natalie will be speaking under the annual shade frame, which is the shade frame up front. And so it will be nice and cool for you there. We're starting off this hydrangea happiness with mop heads and lace caps because these are the plants that are in full glorious flower now, number 1. Number 2, that blue mop head, that round blue hydrangea is Cape Cod's signature flower. These are in 2 different species, Hydrangea macrophylla and Hydrangea serrata. So that's, important for you to know, although you can think of them as mop heads and lace caps. And this is what a lace cap looks like. It's got non-fertile flowers all around the outside and fertile flowers, which are lacy on the inside. And these are lace cap flowers that are just beginning to open. The fertile flowers on the inside have not developed yet. One lovely thing about lace caps is they are more delicate, so that's nice. Number 2, a lot of them are in the Hydrangea serrata or mountain hydrangea species, and they're slightly more bud hardy, and we'll talk about that more in a minute than the others. And number 3? Number 3, the pollinators, the bees often love these because the fertile flowers are bee territory for foraging. Mop heads, they are infertile flowers. They are big, they are round, they are outrageous. They are blue or purple or pink or some mottled color. And because they are so big and outrageous, we love them. Now, here are some tips for success with these plants. First of all, you want well-drained soil, and you want to plan on mulching around them, 1 to 2 inches thick only. And that does several things. It amends the soil from the top down, and it helps keep the moisture evenly moist around those plants. and it suppresses weeds. So plan on mulching your hydrangeas. You also want to plan on a deep soaking every few days, which is better than hand watering and better than an automatic irrigation system that's coming on every other day for 15 or 20 minutes, all right? Soak deeply, but less often. You want to think about perhaps, particularly for older plants, top dressing with compost. And in the fall, that's the perfect time to do it. Put down a layer of compost right on top of what remains of your mulch. And then the next spring, you can put an inch of mulch on top. Or if you have not mulched yet, put down that inch of compost all over the surface, around, beyond the drip line of the plants, and mulch on top of that. You have to take the hydra part of their name seriously, okay? These are hydrangeas because they are thirsty. Hydra means water, and they are thirsty plants. Here are some very, very sad hydrangeas growing with junipers. Junipers are not thirsty plants. They can go for weeks on end without watering. And unfortunately, they were planted here with hydrangeas that can't go for weeks on end. One of these plants is going to die. I'm betting on the hydrangeas because they are not irrigated. Here is another example. I took this down by the ferry in Woods Hole. And you see here our native bayberry, a very drought tolerant big shrub, looks fine, doing well. This was a drought summer like we've had for the past 2 summers. And look at this poor hydrangea. I don't know why anyone planted a hydrangea here because there was no irrigation. So these are plants you need to group together with other hydrangeas and other plants that want frequent watering, and then use those junipers and those bayberries and some of those other native plants that are very drought tolerant. Use those in other parts of your garden. You may have heard that mop heads and lace caps bloom on old wood. I think this term is confusing, frankly, because once it's woody, it all looks old, right? Even when it's dead, it looks old. And so sometimes people are hesitant to prune out the dead stems because they're old, right? It's far better to think about the fact that these flower buds are formed the summer before, all right? In late July and August, frankly, probably even right now, the flower buds for next year, 2023, are being formed, all right? And that is important for you to know, important information about the mop heads and the lace caps. Flower buds are forming in August, and that tells you several things. Number one, it tells you to water deeply once a week in August to keep those buds alive, all right? And here's where they are. Oh dear. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go back. The arrow is pointing here, but the arrow should be pointing to this bud. The arrow should be coming to that bud. That's the germ of next year's flower. And this picture was taken in late July on one of my hydrangeas. And see, even as my hydrangeas are blooming in July and August, those buds are where next year's flowers are forming. So let me go here. There you go. If you look closely at your hydrangeas, you may see these. Now here we have the flower. This shot was taken, I think, in late August. The flower is there, and that is the germ of next year's flower. Now, on some hydrangeas at this time of year, those buds are very, very tiny. But if you have good eyes, or use a magnifying glass or your reading glasses, they are there. So in the spring, this is what happens to those buds. They start to swell and they turn into leaves. And in every one of those pairs of leaves that you see in this shot is the germ of a flower for the coming summer. What does that tell us? That tells us, first of all, that those buds have to make it through the winter in order for our hydrangeas to bloom. Because if we have a winter that is either too cold or a spring freeze, this is what happens to the buds. They get zapped by the cold weather and they turn black, and they do not then turn green, and the plant will not bloom. So here is a picture I took on a client's property in Chatham. And this client, all of her plants had buds early in March, but then in April, those cold off ocean winds came in, and look, you can see which plant, this one on the left, was most exposed to those cold off ocean winds. You can see the side of the plant that was exposed to those cold off ocean winds in April. And you can see the part of the plant that was protected, and those buds made it, and those leaves are forming. And this part of this hydrangea will flower in the coming summer. This part, that is gone. They can cut all those dead stems back. All of this hydrangea, unfortunately, has dead stems. They can cut all of those back because all of those buds got zapped. Now, even when the buds get zapped, there is strong new growth from the base. And this often fools people because they think that, oh, my hydrangea is alive, it's going to flower well. This is one of my hydrangeas. This happens to be in a wind tunnel on my property. Some years this plant blooms beautifully. Some years it blooms a little bit sporadically, and some years not so much. I have to live with that because it's in a wind tunnel. And here you see the wind comes from that direction, from left to right. Look at the buds on the right, on those right stems, have lived and they are developing. And the ones on this side got zapped in that wind tunnel, and none of those are developing. So in this particular year, when I took this photograph, then those are going to, I'm going to cut those out. And for those of you, if you raise your hand, I don't respond to raised hands because I cannot multitask and give this talk and pick up people's raised hands. Type your questions in chat. We'll get to them at the end. All right. So what kills the buds? Number one, extended periods in the winter below 5 or 10 degrees Fahrenheit. That's number one. So all winter I am on hydrangea watch, right? I keep track of how many days it's gone below 10 or 5 degrees and how long that has been, because that tells me what I'm going to hear from people the following summer if their hydrangeas are not blooming. A hard frost in the spring or sustained cold off ocean winds in the spring in those wind tunnels. Now, we haven't had the hard frosts are sort of sporadic on the Cape. So in one location, you might have a hard frost in the spring, in another location not. In one location on Cape Cod, you might have cold off ocean winds in the spring. And here in Sandwich, I might not have that. So you cannot judge from one part of the Cape to the next about what has happened necessarily, because all of those conditions are different. This is an example of a hydrangea that leafed out. It was doing well. It was growing well. It had a germ of a flower bud right here. And we had a very cold 2 nights in April that particular year. And this is what happened, okay? At that time, this was very small and tender, and it got zapped, and this is not going to flower. So you might be thinking, well, can't I wrap them in the winter or the spring? And people do all kinds of things. They put down bamboo cloches to try and cover them up. They put down burlap or wrap them in burlap or cover their hydrangeas with salt marsh hay. They wrap them in tarps, and I'm here to tell you to give it up, because wrapping seldom helps. If a shrub was giving off heat, then it would make sense to put a little bit of a down blanket of hay or burlap around it to hold in that heat. But these plants are not giving off heat. Very few plants give off heat. And so wrapping really does not help, particularly in the cases where the temperatures go below 5 in the winter. All right, Winter protection, forget it, okay? Let's talk about blooming on old and new wood. Endless summer, enchantress, for example, are hydrangeas that bloom on old and new wood. And these are called remontant. Now, more and more hydrangea breeders are releasing remontant varieties because frankly, it's the only chance that somebody in Wisconsin or Minnesota has for having flowers on their hydrangeas. And even then, it's not going to be like on Cape Cod because most of the remontant hydrangeas bloom most heavily on the buds that were formed the previous year, AKA old wood. Remontant means that they will bloom on some of the new canes, and that usually happens in the fall. But you don't get as many flowers on those new cane blooms. Now, if we've had a really bad, here on the Cape, if we've had a bad hydrangea winter, and a lot of those buds have gotten zapped, those remontant varieties will produce some flowers in September and October, but we will not have those flowers in July and August. That's just how it is. Some varieties of hydrangeas are more bud hardy than others. And we'll have to put together a list of bud hardy plants at Country Garden, but there are some like this one on the left is Penny Mac, and this is Twist and Shout, this is Endless Summer. Those are quite bud hardy plants. A lot of the gift hydrangeas that you find at both Country Garden and in the supermarkets at Easter or Mother's Day, those are not so bud hardy. Sometimes you get away with planting them and they bloom. Other times they will live, but they will not flower. Here is an example of my neighbor's hydrangea. And this is a Big Daddy. Big Daddy is not very bud hardy. So this is how his big hydrangea looks right now. That's all new growth. He had a few buds here that made it through the winter. Unfortunately, the less bud hardy hydrangeas, what happens is that as this new growth really takes over, the plant kind of gives up on the ones that did make it through, but the plant, it seems to decide that this new growth is more worthy of its attention than the older buds that had the germ of the flower in them. Unfortunately, my neighbor's hydrangea is not going to bloom well this year. What all of this means for you is to never cut them down in the fall or the spring. If they are making their flower buds in August while they're still in bloom this year, that tells you that it doesn't matter. You can't cut them down in the fall or the spring because you don't want to get rid of those buds, right? So here are some gorgeous Nico blues at Mal Condon's property, and they are big and they are filled with flowers, and Mal has not trimmed them down. He has not tried to make them shorter. He has not neatened them up in the fall or the spring. This, on the other hand, is a Nico blue at a condominium in Falmouth that somebody neatened up either in the fall or the spring by cutting the canes down by about half into a nice round mound. It looked nice and neat all over the winter. But look what you've got. You've got a round mound of green leaves with only a few flowers. And I took this picture in a good hydrangea year. This plant should have been covered with flowers top to bottom like Mal's are there, right? It should have been covered with flowers from top to bottom, but it wasn't because a well-meaning landscaper neatened them up. You want to prune them in the late spring by removing only dead canes, all right? So if here's your hydrangea, this is my quick and dirty sketch here, you will see this stalk right here, second from the right, has a dead top and the first buds are down toward the bottom. And some of these canes have dead tips, but buds all the way up. And a couple of the canes are dead all the way to the ground. If this were my plant in late May or mid-May, depending on the season, this year was mid-May, I could clearly see what was green and what was dead, then you take away what was dead. And you see, I took away those dead canes all the way to the ground if they were all the way to the ground. Then I took away the tips of the canes that were dead from the top, making the cut about an inch above the live growth. If that's the way you prune a mop head or a lace cap hydrangea, as long as those buds made it through the winter, you will have flowers. This is my graphic of a tale of two hydrangeas. I frequently pass two neighbors' property where the neighbor on one side has never neatened their hydrangeas in the fall or the spring, and the neighbor on the other side, every fall they get cut into a nice round mound. And the ones that never get cut, filled with flowers. These were taken 2 minutes away from each other. I stopped and took one picture, and then pulled up and took the other picture. And the person who neatens them up every year, very few flowers. So that tells you you can't neaten them up. Here is my lace cap. And if you come to my gardens during the Cape Cod Hydrangea Festival, I'm open on Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday. You will see this plant. This is a lace cap hydrangea. Here it looks in the spring when it's time to prune. I can clearly see what's living and what's dead on this plant. And all I do is take away what's dead. That's how it looks after it prunes. You will notice something important. I did not try and cut it below the window. Give it up on keeping them shorter, because if I had cut it below the window, that's the equivalent of neatening it up, and I would have had a dome of green on the top and very few flowers on the top. So I leave them above the window, and what is wrong with that? Because I can see the hydrangea flowers from my house. Who wouldn't want to see hydrangeas from their house? You can't make them shorter. These plants replace their height in one summer. So if you tried to cut your hydrangeas shorter this spring or last fall, they will be just as tall or taller as they were last summer by the end of July. This one, for example, this was 6 feet tall, this hydrangea that was Nico blue that was neatened up. There's no keeping them shorter. So give it up. These plants were probably tried to make shorter. Look at this is all the new growth, which has replaced its height in one summer. This is clearly a shot that I took in late July, right? So, you know, if they are too big for the location, move them, all right? Move them. If your hydrangeas aren't blooming, either the buds were zapped by winter or spring cold, or the canes were cut down in the fall or the spring, or they are growing in deep shade. Now, hydrangeas do bloom well in dappled shade. So if they're in a dappled sunlight situation, they should be blooming. But if they are not blooming well, maybe you have a variety that is not very bud hardy. And I have a few hydrangeas in my property right now. A lot of the older things like Teller Blue and Glowing Embers, they are not reliably bud hardy. And I'm going to dig them up and say bye, because once every 6 years is not often enough. Hydrangeas also want 3 hours of sun. All right, so at least 3 hours of sun, but that could be dappled sunlight. Now, you can grow hydrangeas in full sun. Here's a gas station, I don't know, somewhere along 28, where they planted hydrangeas and Stella d'Oro daylilies, which look beautiful at the end of June and early July. That's pretty much what we have now. These flowers on these plants, I can guarantee you, will be brown in August. And that is because in full sun, these flowers get zapped. Are not zapped, they get burned, okay? They get wilted, they get burned, okay? So if you want your hydrangeas flowers to last the longest, plant them in part shade or morning sun and afternoon shade, because otherwise this is what happens. The hydrangeas in the heat of the midday sun, they wilt a little bit, and every time they wilt a little bit, some of the cells die. And so every time they wilt a little bit, more and more is dead and they start to brown out. And that's a shame because when these shrubs are planted in afternoon shade, these flowers last into September. Hydrangeas are one of the most long blooming shrubs that you can plant if they are put in the right location. So put them where they are shaded in the afternoon. Afternoon sun or very hot weather causes them to wilt, and the more often they wilt, the browner the flowers will be. Now, those plants, by the way, are often not wilting because the soil is dry. Often they are wilting because in the heat of the hot sun and midday, the flowers and the leaves respire so much water that the plants can't take it up fast enough, and that browns your flowers. So plant them in the morning sun and afternoon shade. Let's talk a little bit about color. All right, because we love the macrophyllus and some of the serratas. Not all of them change color, but most of them do. All right. And sometimes you can have 3, 4 colors on the same plant. Basically, many of these plants are pink in alkaline soil and blue in acidic soil. We on Cape Cod have naturally acidic soil unless something is changing that for you. And sometimes that's a cement walkway, cement foundation, liming of the lawn, or alkaline water from town water. Those are the things that can change your soil from acid to alkaline. But most of the time, for most people on the Cape, if you do nothing, your hydrangeas will be blue. All right. It is the aluminum in the soil that makes them blue. It's not pennies, not nickels or rusty nails. Those are all old myths. It is aluminum in the soil, and you already have aluminum in the soil, but it is the acidity that allows the plant to take up the aluminum that turns the flower blue. So if you have alkaline soil and your flowers are pink and you don't want them pink, you can put down sulfur or aluminum sulfate, and that will change your hydrangeas back to blue, but it's not instant, okay? You have to have patience here. And I know that's hard for some of you, but you have to have patience with this because colors don't change instantly overnight, all right? And when it comes to aluminum sulfate, you really have to be careful because if you use too much, first of all, your flowers can burn and get brown. And second of all, they can turn this weird swimming pool turquoise color that really looks kind of fake. So be careful with aluminum sulfate. Sulfur is a much gentler way for you to lower the pH of your soil. Lime can make them pink. If you want your hydrangeas to be pink, then by all means, you can put down lime. Again, it is not instant. It is not fast. You have to repeat it fall and spring, okay? And you might periodically want to have a pH test to see where you are in terms of the alkalinity. I think it's easiest to go with what you've got, right? I don't try and adjust the pH on any of my plants. And so I have some plants like this that are close to a cement foundation and walkway, and they're kind of two minds. They have blue and pink flowers on them. Fine, I don't care. They're gorgeous, right? Some of them are lavender. I have some plants that turn deep blue when they're supposed to be pink, and I have some that are stay pink. So I just let them do what they do, and I appreciate them for that because otherwise it's a little exhausting. Know that the depth of color is genetic, all right? And the color develops over the summer. Now, what do I mean about all of that? First of all, you will notice there are hydrangeas that are coming out now. A lot of them have kind of light colors, right? And the depth of color develops over time. See down here in the corner where it's a lot of cream color and a little blue. All of these are going to get deeper blue as the flowers mature. These are early endless summer, and you can see, you know, they will get deeper blue. However, they are never going to be dark blue and they are never going to be dark purple. The genetics of this plant will keep them a medium blue once they're mature or a medium pink, but they're never going to be deep pink or deep blue or dark purple. And the colors change in the fall. This is what we in the hydrangea world call the antique phase, where this happens to be right here. That is an endless summer hydrangea that has not only turned kind of a gray green, but with purple tinges. And it's a wonderful thing because they change, they don't stay that sky blue, but they get other colors that are just fantastic. So, you know, enjoy. Now, let's talk about some other varieties that you should be aware of. These will always bloom. It doesn't matter how cold it gets in the winter. It doesn't matter if the spouse cuts them down at the wrong time or some well-meaning landscaper cuts them down. Yay, paniculatas. And never have you had more of a choice of paniculatas. One of the real old-fashioned varieties that you can see when you come to my garden is Hydrangea paniculata grandiflora, also called the PG hydrangea. Huge flowers, start out white and they turn pink. And I often think that they look like bears' heads with their snouts and the ears on top. Bobo is a relatively new hydrangea that is a paniculata that gets to be about 4 feet tall and wide, maybe a little bit bigger. And the good news about Bobo and all paniculatas is that you can prune them back fairly hard, which can keep them a little bit lower. You've often heard me say that it's best not to try and fight a plant's genetics, and that is true. But these are plants that if you do prune them back by a half or so, they will still flower. So that's a good thing. Firelight is one of my favorite newer varieties of paniculata. It starts out white. You will see it white in my gardens if you come. And then very quickly in August and September, it turns pink, first a bright pink, and then a beautiful wine red. Lovely plant, larger growing hydrangea. And there's also Firelight Tidbit, which stays smaller even than Bobo. And that's a good thing if you need a small plant. Not only that, but Bobo does not turn pink. Firelight Tidbit gets that pink color later on in the fall. And so look for that one if you want a shorter growing plant. You'll hear, if you come to Country Garden for Natalie's talk tomorrow at 4 o'clock, you will hear more about Firelight Tidbit. Fairy Tale Bride. Now, I only have a little one of these so far, and right now it's being a little bit overrun in a container by some petunias, but I can hardly wait to have a big one because it is a cascading hydrangea, Fairy Tale Bride. It's like a lace cap, only it's a paniculata, right? So it blooms on new growth and it kind of gently drapes. I want one to put next to my stone wall, to go kind of over my stone wall. These are amazing in containers as well. A newer variety, maybe not commonly every day found, but watch for it. Watch for it in the future. And watch for the arborescens, the AKA smooth hydrangeas, one of our native hydrangeas. You all know, I think, Annabelle, right? That's one of the smooth hydrangeas. Annabelle is a great one, but there's a pink version of this, Invincible Spirit 2. I adore this plant. If you want more color than white, and you want color from the end of June on, and you want a plant that blooms on new growth, and it doesn't matter who prunes it when, you want Invincible Spirit 2. Too bad they aren't blue, but you know what? They're a gorgeous pink, and they're a wonderful plant. They're a wonderful cut flower. And here's another new one. I don't have this yet, but I can hardly wait. This is Invincible Lace. And you can see what advantages Invincible Lace has. It is a native hydrangea and it's attractive to the pollinators because it's got all of these lovely fertile flowers that are nectar sources. I love this plant. Wee White. I'm featuring it tomorrow on Garden Line in the morning. So join me at 8 o'clock on WXTK. I am talking about Wee White. It is a short version of the smooth hydrangea. So those of you who have smaller gardens, those of you who want a hydrangea in and among your perennials that's not going to take over, those of you who want a hydrangea that's not going to get tall and dominate above the windows, you want Wee White. Come on into Country Garden and see the selection that we've got right now. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm going to get back to the questions now, but as I mentioned in the beginning, we are your hydrangea headquarters. You can see hydrangeas of all colors and all types and all sizes. And you can come and hear Natalie talk tomorrow at 4 o'clock. She is from Proven Winners Spring Meadow Nursery, is a friend of mine, and I hope you will come and give her a warm Cape Cod welcome. All right, so let's get out of this. Let's click stop share. Let me come back to the questions. All right, now, I gotta adjust my scarf here so we can not only admire my scarf from Voila in Yarmouth, but also we can admire my Country Garden logo. Okay, here we go. Now I'm coming back here. And how can you tell if the yellowing leaves on a hydrangea come from over or under watering? This is a great question. In general with plants, if you see the older leaves at the bottom yellowing and the younger ones at the top all look green and fine, that's underwatering. Because what a plant does when it's dry, it knows that it doesn't have the water to sustain all of those leaves. So what's most important to the plant? To keep the top new growth alive, right? That's where the action is, up top in the new. And so it will jettison the lower leaves. They will turn yellow and fall off if the plant has gotten too dry. If a plant is too wet, you're more likely to see more leaves all over the plant turn yellow. And frankly, this is true of houseplants, is true of perennials, a lot of plants. So if you see the older leaves, whether it's in a container or your hydrangea in the ground, turning yellow and falling off, and the top is green and vital, underwatering. More yellow over the whole thing, overwatering. How do you prune an oak leaf hydrangea? Well, hopefully you don't prune an oak leaf hydrangea, because oak leaves are just like the mop heads and the lace caps, that they make their flower buds the summer before. So while you still have flowers from this year on your oak leaf, it is making the buds for next year. So don't try and make it shorter. If your oak leaf is too big for the location, either move other plants from around it or transplant it to another location where it can get to be big, all right? If you need to kind of adjust the shape a little bit, and I'd caution you about that, because oak leaves are not nice and even plants. Oak leaves are asymmetrical shrubs, and buy into that, appreciate that, all right? Because it's one of the nice things about them. But if there's one branch that's kind of long and too funky, or bare and then with green, cut that back into the rest of the plant at any time. That's all right. But never prune them all overall. Never try and make them shorter, because you won't have good flowers and you're fighting the genetics. The plant is going to regrow just as big in the coming time. Okay, I'm so glad that so many of you are joining me for the first time. That's so nice to see in chat. And if this is the first time that you are joining me, type that into chat if you haven't already, because I love seeing how many new folks that we have. It's a really wonderful thing. We've been doing these happy hours since COVID hit, and I love the fact that people are still coming and discovering what we do. Should we expect to see blooms if we just planted our hydrangeas last spring, summer? You mean this year, 2022, it depends on the hydrangea. If they are paniculatas, yes. If they are mop heads or lace caps, if you don't see any flowers on them, if it's one of the remontant varieties, you might see a couple flowers in the fall, but you won't see a big production of flowers on the mop heads and the lace caps, all right? If they are an arborescens, smooth hydrangeas like an Annabelle, if they are a paniculata, yes, you will see flowers. And by the way, a lot of paniculatas in the landscape right now show no sign of flowers because they come later. My grandiflora, nothing, right? Quickfire, I've got flowers, and that's why it was named Quickfire, because it comes into bloom earlier. My firelight, I've got flowers because it comes into bloom earlier. But some of the other paniculatas, my Pinky Winky, not so much. All right, can I transplant a paniculata now, or do I have to wait till fall? If I were you, Carol, I would wait until fall. If you can wait, please do, all right? If you have to transplant it now, you can dig up as much of the roots as possible and water it deeply every 3 days after you move it. It will suffer, and it probably won't bloom well, and probably a good portion of the leaves will fall off, all right? You've often heard me say that in the garden, there's an ideal time to do something, and then there's real life. If it's real life and you're gonna have to dig that up because a septic system needs to be replaced or something, by all means do it. If you can wait until fall, wait and do it in early September. And by the way, early September or say late March, early April, those are the best time to move any hydrangea. And some of them will suffer, of course, the year after. You won't have as good a flowering, but after that, they should be fine. When to cut everything off to the ground, if ever. If you're talking about the blue mop heads or the lace caps, the only time you cut everything to the ground is if all those canes are dead. If at the end of May, there is no green growth on any of those canes, you can cut them down because dead is dead. So you can remove dead wood anytime, but you should never cut them down very early in the spring before you know if the buds have made it through the winter, and you should never cut them down in the fall. I have 3 hydrangeas that do not have any buds this year. They did not flower well last year either. I think they are rebloomers. Is it okay for me to fertilize them now and help them for next season? A light amount of fertilizer, something like Hollytone, is fine. But what you should all know is fertilizer is never the answer. And it's certainly not the answer to hydrangeas that don't bloom. There are some hydrangeas, as I mentioned before, that there are some hydrangeas that are just not that bud hardy. And I'm taking several of them out of my garden, hopefully this fall. Maybe even before that, but probably after the Hydrangea Festival. So if they didn't bloom well last summer and they weren't cut down in any way, I'd suspect that you might have one of the varieties that's not that bud hardy, because last summer was a fantastic hydrangea year. This year, a little spotty. So, all right. I'm glad, Maggie, that you like me mentioning voila and the scarf. Thank you. Frederic is a treasure. What causes a hydrangea, which has always been blue, to have purple and pink blooms this year also? It's getting some lime from somewhere, okay? Now, sometimes that comes from a lawn, all right? Sometimes that comes because the plant is growing near cement or stone dust. So if it's growing near a walkway or a foundation of a house, both of those things, stone dust and cement, sweeten soil, they leach lime over time. And sometimes it happens because certain towns keep their water quite alkaline so that the acidic water doesn't leach copper out of your pipes in the house, and it doesn't make those green rings around your toilets. Remember, back in the day, everybody had a green ring occasionally around their toilet. And that was because acid water was leaching copper from the pipes. That doesn't happen anymore. And that's because towns often raise the pH of their water. Well, if you water your plants with town water that has had the pH raised over time, not quickly, but over time, that can also sweeten soil. You can either decide, Christine, to sit back and enjoy the multicolors, right? That's the approach I take with the hydrangea that's near my walkway. I just, whatever it is, and that's great. So you can do that, or you can decide that you want it to be blue and then put sulfur or a little bit of aluminum sulfate, and know that that's not going to happen quickly, but you can bring it back to acidic conditions that way. Or you can decide that you like the pink and add more lime. Oh, Jan, I'm glad you like the Hydrangea Country Gardens. Yeah, it came to me last night. Oh, we should rename it. What can I do to encourage my climbing hydrangea to bloom? It's produced only one blossom in many years. They can be a little recalcitrant sometimes. I admit that. Okay. What you can do to encourage it to bloom is, well, first of all, you might want to have a soil test done just to see what is happening on soil level, in case the pH might be wildly acidic or wildly alkaline. That's always a good thing to do, to just rule that out. But basically, what I would do if I were you is I would give it a good deep soaking once a week, starting right now. Okay? Deep soaking. We've had 2 years of drought summer. And if that plant is not getting a good deep soaking once a week, and by that, I don't mean 15 minutes every other day by a sprinkler system. I mean a sprinkler on that plant once a week for 2.5 or 3 hours, okay? Deep soaking once a week now through August and September, because that's when it's making flower buds. Okay, what is the address of your gardens in Sandwich? I'm typing it in chat, LAWR, and Lane Sandwich. And I'm typing open Sunday, Monday, and Wednesday. Okay. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, if you click on the little 3 dots that's in your chat box down there, you'll have the opportunity to save chat. You can save all of this if you want to. Now, let me go back to have I done this? Okay. I'm trying to breed hydrangeas. What time of year should I transfer them to the ground? Well, if you want them to overwinter, you should transfer them to the ground as soon as possible, so they have as long as possible to establish their root system. Okay. Now, if they're teeny tiny, of course, then you don't want to. But as soon as they get to be, 4 or 5 inches, put them in the ground. If they're very small, you could overwinter them in pots in an unheated shed or garage. What is the best fertilizer and when is the best time? If you want them to stay blue, I think the best fertilizer is Hollytone. A light application of Hollytone in April is usually all they need. Now, if your leaves are not looking green and, real vital, if they're looking kind of pale, you might want to either do a slightly heavier application of Hollytone in April, or you might want to put down an application of Hollytone in both April and September, okay? Best time to transplant mop heads, I think I answered that, and that is in the fall or in the early spring. All right, let me see. Okay, I'm coming back here to ones I missed, so don't worry, hold on. I'm coming back. Okay, what about coffee or coffee grounds to increase acidity? Doesn't work. First of all, if you've already made coffee, the acidity has gone into your coffee cup. Coffee grounds from brewed coffee are not that acidic, number 1. Number 2, in the composting process, pH comes to neutral. So you could mulch your garden with straight coffee grounds or pine needles or whatever it is. And as they decompose, pH comes to neutral. Coffee grounds are great organic matter. By all means, put them around your plants. They're not going to increase the acidity of your soil. Use sulfur or aluminum sulfate. Only 2 of my bobos have buds, 2 budding, get more sun. That's it. Bobo, most paniculatas need a fair amount of sun. Now, that said, my bobo doesn't have many buds yet because it's a little early. And my bobo is in part sun, part shade. So it could be that you just have to wait a little longer for those ones that are in more shade. But if they don't bud up by the end of July, you will know they're in too much shade. Invincible Spirit 2, planted under hemlocks in shade, mostly small flower heads, white with slight pink edges. Those Invincible Spirit 2, the breeders recommend that they be planted in full sun. They are not shade plants. You need those plants to get at least, I would say, 4 hours of dead on sun. So perhaps you want to move them. They will have bigger flowers and they will be darker in color in more sun. And I've got them in a more shady location and in a sunnier location, and they are 200% better in the sunnier location. How far should different hydrangeas bushes be planted? Well, it kind of depends on the variety, okay? Because a firelight tidbit only gets this wide, you know, and so they can be planted 2 feet apart or 3 feet apart, whereas a endless summer or enchantress or one of the other blue hydrangeas, they grow 6 feet wide. Annabelle grows 6 feet wide. So needless to say, you don't want to plant those too close together unless you want a continuous hydrangea hedge. And by the way, if you've never Googled hydrangea hedges in the Azores, Google that, hydrangea hedges in the Azores. In the Azores, these are grown for livestock hedges, and they have huge hydrangeas around their fields, all in amazing bloom. It's pretty unbelievable. Look for that. Okay. Are blooms good for cutting? The blooms on blue mophead hydrangeas are good for cutting, but later in the summer. If you cut them now too early, they will wilt very quickly. And so all those people who steal people's hydrangeas at this time of year, they're going to be very disappointed because those flowers are going to wilt quickly. And the varieties, by the way, that are bred for wedding flowers, they are different from our endless summer and our Nico blues and our hydrangeas here on the Cape. They are flowers that are bred for cutting earlier, and most of those we don't have in our garden. Few of the everlasting series are bred for cutting, and you could cut them earlier. So what happened to the deep blue city line Rio? I am so sad. And the reason is the breeder, the brander, I would say, Proven Winners, has decided to discontinue that plant. And I told them how sad I was about that. They decided that because it's not a remontant variety. It only blooms on the 2nd year growth from buds that have formed the year before, which means that most of the country can't grow that plant very successfully. However, we here on the Cape really grew that plant successfully, and it was quite bud hardy, and the flowers were amazing in color. And I am so disappointed that they dropped that plant from their line. And yeah, so I'm sorry. And I don't know whether it might be picked up by other people now that Proven Winners are not growing it, but I'm hoping so, and I'll keep you posted about it. All right, I will. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the happy hour. Susan, Fire Island Seaside series, not bud hardy, I don't know, because I have not grown that myself. All right. I have only grown a couple of Seaside, and only for a year, so not long enough for me to know. So Seaside Serenade, let's find out, and let's all collect the data. You know what? I'm not sure I have time for a daylily question. Deborah, but you know what? Email me, clfornari@countrygarden.com. I will answer your questions. And I bought hydrangeas from Country Garden last September, wintered them in my basement, brought them outside after frost, and had to clear the brush, and now can finally plant them. Some have leafed out at the base and some not so. So the ones who have not are dead, probably. If it hasn't leafed out at all, even from the base, it's probably gone. Should I plant them and see how it goes next summer? Anything that has green on it now, absolutely plant them. Anything that has no green by this point, even if you've watered it, it's a goner. It's not going to come back at this point. Is bumper crop compost better when I plant? Any compost is fine, but spread it over the whole area. Don't just amend the hole. You know, amending just a hole is old school. And what we know now is that we want to spread compost over the whole area, plant your plant, fill the hole with native soil and whatever of the compost has gotten mixed in. And that's how you should amend. And then in the future, you amend from the top down like nature does it. Compost and an inch of mulch on the surface of the soil. Well, I am so glad that you joined me today. I hope we see many of you tomorrow for Natalie's talk at 4 o'clock at your Hydrangea headquarters, Hyannis Country Garden. Later, this recording will be available if you want to watch it again, and it will be also available on the Hyannis Country Garden Facebook page as a recording of Facebook Live. So thank you very much. Cheers. Come join me in my gardens at the Hydrangea Festival. Visit as many gardens as you can. Go to as many events as you can and celebrate this wonderful plant in this wonderful place that we live.